I mean, I guess we can start and others will catch up. So, hello everybody. I'm very happy to be here to introduce another Conformal talk. So these Conformal talks are public online conferences that we organize regularly in the Conformal Association to highlight research on ethics, information, recommender systems, and so on. For those who don't know Conformal is a research action project where we are building alternative recommender systems. Essentially, we're trying to look for those that are strengthening democracy instead of destroying it. So today it's my great pleasure to introduce Giovanni de Toni, who will be the speaker. And he will be talking about removing mitigating unwanted recommendations. Giovanni, you have the floor.
Thank you for the introduction. Like, can you hear me? Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes.
So, okay, let's start. So yes, today I'm very happy to be here. Also, thank you for the invitation and for organizing these very nice, let's say, talks and gatherings. So today I'm going to talk about this work that we done in collaboration with the Cristian Cossoni and Erasmo Purificato that are also joining in the chat today, and other, let's say, collaborations, other collaborators from the University of Trento and let's, for example, the European Commission. And so yeah, today we're going to talk about mitigating unwanted recommendation in recommendation systems provably. So again, to give a bit, let's say, a brief introduction, brief, let's say, background about me. I am a research scientist at Fondazione Bruno Kessler, situated in Trento, Italy, that you can see here in this very, very nice picture. And broadly, let's say, my research focuses on trying to understand and improve the social impact of AI. And to do so, I usually do many techniques, use many techniques from let's say, machine learning, causality, and uncertainty quantification. So again, on the menu, we have this, how we can use this technique to mitigate unwanted recommendation in Rexis. So the problem, as you may know, I think it's, you know that the recommendation systems usually spread potentially unwanted or harmful content in user feeds. We have several anecdotal examples of this happening worldwide. For example, here I show you this example of from last September of Catherine, who basically was fed potentially gruesome and distressing video about pregnancy, if I remember correctly, on Instagram. And there was nothing she could do in order to, let's say, avoid seeing this kind of content. And in general, let's say, recommendation systems, and especially certain online platforms, are known to promote certain kind of designs, for example, to push and to make, let's say, that make this content kind of viral and happens to be in user feeds. And moreover, let's say this happens even though usually these platforms provide certain affordances, such as do not recommend or not interested buttons. For example, here, this is an example taken from TikTok that should signal to the platform that we don't want to see certain content. But however, these affordances are known to be not really useful, and they are not really used and understood by users. In practice, they most likely work like this kind of button that you see on traffic lights that you just press to cross, and they never work, but they're there anyway. So in the past years, there were some, let's say, for example, Mozilla Foundation did some studies on the effectiveness of certain tools, on certain buttons, like the do not recommend affordances in the platforms, and they show that, for example, in YouTube, these affordances weren't unable to suppress unwanted content in user feeds, provably and let's say at scale, so that we're getting mixed results. And indeed, this is actually a very important topic, I believe, because it's especially now with the upcoming and European legislations on, for example, online platform like the Digital Service Act, we have several provisions that try to, let's say, enforce certain requirements of, for example, very large online platforms to provide mechanisms, for example, to mitigate or potentially control potentially systemic risks caused by these platforms. If I recall correctly, for example, risks related to health or mental health of users. So in particular, we know that, again, from also the literature, recommendation system contribute to the spread of this potentially unwanted content. And also they create this kind of like weird phenomenon like filter bubbles and rabbit holes that also can degrade the user experience. And in general, the mitigation strategies that are available to users kind of suffer from low user awareness and limited effectiveness, thus prompting people, for example, to resort to folk theories to try to influence, let's say, how the recommendation system behavior, for example, I think on Twitter, people try to share a screenshot of a post rather than the full post to avoid the algorithm learning from their behavior and recommending them more of that content. So in this work, we try to answer the following question, given all of these, let's say, problems. So how can we find a way to mitigate exposures to wanted recommendation provably, given simple binary user feedback that can we get from their interface? Let's say in our paper that we was presented last year at the same conference on recommendation system, we did basically, these are our contribution for this paper. We did an analysis of the phenomena given a real-world data set, and specifically looking at the real-world user reporting patterns. We provide a postdoc method that can limit unwanted recommendation, unwanted items, provably exploiting safe content. And we also provide, let's say, an heuristic strategy that we can use to select this kind of safe item alternatives in order to balance between reducing unwanted exposure and personalization of the user feeds. And also we did some offline experiments on these real-world data to evaluate somehow the effectiveness of the approach. Again, we first started tackling this problem by, let's say, doing an analysis of a real-world data set called QuiRand, which is a data set of user item interaction coming from Kuaishou, which is a very large Chinese platform where user can send basically short videos, much like TikTok. And they made available this data set in 2022, which is one of the few data set, I think, one of the, let's say, the only one that provide the signal coming from the do not recommend or I'm not interested button available within these platforms. We started our analysis from this dataset by looking at the trends happening in the reporting patterns of users using this affordance to potentially, let's say, signal certain videos to the platform in order to avoid seeing them again. In particular, users in this platform can decide, for example, if they want to report a video or not. And the idea from our analysis, it comes out that around 30% of users reports at least one video during the collection period of this dataset. But in general, like many users, like 95%, reports very few videos. Let's say 1% of the videos they have seen through the platform. And indeed, also we show that basically reported videos in practice have a watch time distribution which is very similar as the non-reported ones. Thus meaning that, especially in this Kuaishou case, engagement seems not to be a useful indicator of if a video will be reported or not by the user. Moreover, we also noticed that around almost 3% of videos have been seen before by users, so they are proposed again through the platform. And so we were interested to understand what happens in this specific situation and to analyze the behavior of a user when he or she encounters a video that was previously seen sometimes back in the past. In particular, we looked at the distribution, let's say, of the watch time between the first time and the second time a user sees a certain video. And we show that, for example, 99% of items generally, when they are encountered a second time, they're not, for example, reported to the platform by the user. So the user sometimes linger on them, dwell on them a bit longer, but in general, let's say, they are not interacted with further. However, there is a very small percentage of items, around 0.1%, that are videos that the user has previously flagged, but these videos, nevertheless, are then presented to them again through the platform. Meaning that potentially, let's say, these platforms can still suggest undesired content despite potentially explicit user feedback given on those videos.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I wanted to say that I usually try to have these kind of talks very as interactive as possible. So if you have questions, please just ask.
So like the right columns is like the watch time in the second time they are shown the video.
Yes, like this is the second time, the watch time, the second time a user has seen a certain video.
It's quite larger than the first time.
Yeah, I mean, like here, let's say, I mean, what are you referring to? Like to these videos here, this kind of like videos that the user maybe do not flag and then do not flag the second time, or like this video here, like the boxed ones.
I mean, like in all of them, like the last column is like larger than the watch time the first time, right?
Yeah, we thought about it, and we thought that actually maybe there are some videos that user maybe skip because they don't want to see the first time. Maybe they're going to say like, I'm going to see this later on. I'm going to like rewatch it later on. And then when they encounter it later on, they linger on it a bit longer. But nevertheless, like the variance is a bit higher. I mean, standard deviation, sorry, is a bit higher. So the behavior is not really consistent.
I mean, to me, it's already quite a striking finding that if you keep pushing, people end up watching. It looks like this, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's. I think one finding which we thought it was interesting is that for videos that are reported, let's say, and then let's say reported again the second time the user they saw the video, the watch time is kind of very similar.
Yeah.
And so we thought that maybe, I mean, users tend to, let's say, watch again a content to understand better if they don't like it or if they don't agree with what's present in the video, and then they flag it again, saying that I don't want to see this like ever again. So, like to provide a stronger signal to the platform in this case. But it's.
I found the last row even more striking. Like people flagged it, and then they still watch it longer. Like they flag it very quickly.
I think here, like the last line is also very interesting because there are certain videos that the user flag, and then the second time they saw them, they don't really flag them again, but actually they watch them a bit longer. Because I guess it's one reasoning. One of the idea we had is that maybe flagging a video is a very time-consuming action, and it takes like it's 2 clicks away in the interface. So people tend to skip videos as a implicit signal that don't want to see certain content. But when they see the content again, maybe they spend a bit more time on it to understand if they didn't really like it. So and then they skip again. So it's but we couldn't like from the data, it's not really possible to understand which is which of this behavior.
I think Christian has a question.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to jump in also to point out that this is a short video platform. And so one thing that we saw is that people sometimes rewatch the same content multiple times. So like for even longer the duration, because the first time that they see it, they watch it more than their length, basically. So they watch it multiple times. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Giovanni, but do you remember how long is the duration of the median duration of video on this data set?
It's, I think, very small, like 12 seconds.
Yeah, I remember something like this. So, yeah.
They're very short videos. Or actually, no, I think it's like 24 seconds, because on average, people spend like 12 seconds watching a video. So it's a bit longer than that. But I would have to check again.
I mean, and these figures are already scary to me. But
yeah. So, any more questions about this, or?
No, I'm good.
I go. Okay. So, so let's say, given all of these analyses that we have done, so we thought, okay, how can we then, let's say, exploit maybe some of these findings or some ideas to embed this kind of recommendation systems with the risk control properties or guarantees for users. And so we first started to analyze the classical, let's say, setup, two-stage setup of recommendation systems, where we have, let's say, an item pool, where we have, let's say, items that the user, like, say, might like or not like, that you can see here, like green or red. It's a not very nice choice of color, but anyway. Then we have, let's say, a filtering step or a candidate generation step, depending on the architecture, where we use, let's say, given a user profile, we use, for example, a score function or a certain function to filter out certain items. For example, all the items that score below a given threshold. And then at the end, we have the re-ranking step, where we have, let's say, re-ranking function or model that can be literally anything, a GNN-based model, a transformer-based model, you name it, that is used to, let's say, provide, for example, a top K recommendation to the user. For example, here, like in the YouTube homepage. And in our setup, we, let's say, to measure the risk or in general the unwantedness of a certain number of recommendation, we simply use this function here, which counts the fraction of item the user flag as unwanted in the let's say in the top K recommendation that are provided to them. For example, here we have, let's say, 8 items, and only 2 are flagged by a user, so the risk will be 1/4. So, given all of this, let's say, machinery, mathematically speaking, the result question boils down to the following, let's say, optimization objective, where we want to find, let's say, an optimal threshold lambda that can be used during the filtering step to keep the expected risk under, let's say, given level alpha. That can be, for example, something that the user might be able to specify through their user interface. And all of this, let's say, we want, for example, also doing this by also maximizing a certain loss or a certain target metric given by the decision maker, such as, I don't know, serendipity, diversity, you name it. The question is now, how can we do this? And we find out that we can use a certain technique from the uncertainty quantification literature in machine learning, which is called the conformal risk control. And the idea is that this conformal risk control theory enables us to provide some model-free and distribution-free guarantees, which enables us to bound any target metric, for example, our risk, below any given threshold. requiring, let's say, only, for example, a calibration set that can to calibrate, let's say, this threshold, and then a score function that we can use to compute this calibration lambda. In practice, we can map the component of conformal use control to the recommendation system scenario, where the score function is basically the record score for each item. The calibration set can be an held out set of historical user item interaction. And the target metric is basically the unwantedness of the top K recommendation that I showed you in the previous slide. More specifically, to make you understand better how this thing works in practice, here I show you an example of the expected risk, expected unwantedness, measured on this calibration set, historical user item interaction set that we have, while increasing our lambda that we assume here is bounded between 0 and 1. And we see that, let's say, maybe the risk monotonically decreases as lambda increases, since by increasing lambda, we filter out many more items from the potential candidates. In short, if the user, imagine that the user wants to achieve this given level of alpha, of harmfulness, overall harmfulness in his recommendation, we just have to pick, let's say, the lambda that intersects the blue and red line. And assuming the data exchangeability, this lambda also will achieve the same risk control or empirical risk at test time. Practically speaking, it's important also to notice that this risk control guarantees work only as long as the risk metric we are trying to bound is decreased monotonically with respect to lambda. If this is not the case, then we would need to have more alternative techniques with stronger guarantees and stronger assumption. So when we deploy the threshold, what happens in practice? You can see here an example. On the x-axis, I have, let's say, the items I can provide to my user, sorted by score. And on the y-axis, I have, for example, the score assigned by my classifier. Given the threshold lambda that I picked up in the previous step during calibration, I can basically threshold and remove all the items that are score below that lambda that you can see here. For example, from 11 to 20, those items are discarded. And then from the remaining one, I can, for example, pick the top K to provide to a user. And by doing this, I'm sure that I'm guaranteed that my risk will be controlled at test time. Indeed, in our, let's say, risk controlling recommendation system, if we pick lambda by using this particular estimator computed over this calibration set, then we are sure that for any alpha the user might specify at test time, we will achieve the desired risk control guarantees. So we were gonna basically bound in expectation the risk at test time for any user. This is quite nice, let's say, already. However, a naive application of this conformal risk control technique has this side effect of reducing our available item pool, okay? And the idea is that by, for example, ensuring a stronger level of risk control, okay, ensuring, for example, a very low wantedness or risk at test time in the recommendation, I will have to pick higher lambda. For example, here is 0.4. But by increasing the lambda, I will have fewer items I can then re-rank and provide in the top K recommendation. And eventually, if I choose let's say, a too restrictive lambda, I potentially will have 0 or very few items to provide to a user, which is maybe something that is actually defeats the overall purpose of having, let's say, a recommendation system in the first place.
So, I have a question. I'm not sure I understand.
Sure.
Here, the score function, the S function here.
Yeah.
Small s, does it take into account the signals of report?
Yes. You can imagine that the score function here, and this is the same that's going to be in our experiments. It's a function, a predictor that tries to predict if an item will be reported to the platform, given a user profile. And so the idea is that given this, let's say, I can train this, I can assume to have this kind of score function pre-trained on some data I have of user, let's say, reporting items to the platform. And then I can compute all of these threshold and calibrations over using this score function.
Okay. And so the graph you're showing here is like the data available, or how do you get?
This is actually like these are not, let's say, real data, but it's just an example to show you, let's say, how it works in practice under the hood.
Okay.
But it's basically the same as how it works then in our experiments. So to go a bit beyond this, we thought, okay, instead of like just removing items from the candidate pools, we can instead try to replace risky items with potentially safe ones. And in our case, in our scenario, we choose these like safe items from items that the user has previously seen and potentially liked. And the idea is that we can choose these safe items by looking at their initial watch time of videos, the first time they are encountered through the platform. I'm going to show you a bit of pseudocode to show you what I mean, but don't be scared. So the idea here, this is like the algorithm, the risk control algorithm you can put on top of a pre-trained recommendation system to ensure to, let's say, embed it with the risk control properties. Okay, and the idea here, for example, that here I have my risk control procedure that picks a certain lambda, given an alpha risk level alpha provided by the user, and then this T set here represent the remaining items we are left with after we apply the filtering step with the score function that we was talking about before. Now, instead of just using this T set here, we also compute another set that takes all the items the user has seen before, and then and not flagged, obviously, and then we filter them by their initial watch time by picking items, for example, the user has seen more than 50% of the entire duration. And we generate, let's say, this set of potentially safe alternatives. And in practice, then we merge this set of safe alternatives with the original one, and then we can just run the re-ranking step over this T replace overall basket of items to provide a top K recommendation to ensure that we get, let's say, a balanced and a stable size recommendation set size at test time. However, one thing that we noticed with this procedure is that if you remember our analysis, there are some videos that the first time they're seen by the user are not really, let's say, flagged to the platform, but when they are seen the second time, the user, they're going to be flagged by a user. And this is actually a problem for, let's say, our replacing technique, because it would break the risk control guarantees of monotonicity with Lambda. Let's say. So in our paper, we also try to answer the following question: how can we choose this kind of like safe repeated items? So is there like a rule we can use to pick them in a way to maintain this kind of like risk control guarantees? And the answer is yes. We show with, let's say, this empirical property that above a certain watch time, a certain threshold, the probability of a user flagging an item is basically 0. In fact, here, if you look here on this plot on the right, that shows basically on the green bars shows the likelihood of picking a repeated video that the user will flag eventually once he will see it a second time. If we pick, let's say, a repeated video by, let's say, picking only videos which are watched at least more than, let's say, 1% or 10% of their total duration, we see that basically the probability of picking this kind of like, let's say, risky items goes to 0, thus making this kind of like filtering threshold a suitable technique to pick this potentially safe content to provide to the user again eventually at test time. I'm going to show you now a bit of some, let's say, results on some offline experiments we did on Quasio data. We did some experiments, let's say, testing, let's say, several recommenders or several, let's say, score function by taking several recommenders, GNN-based one, transformer-based one, and so on. And in our scenario, also, we tested, let's say, two strategies, the standard one, the remove one, where we apply conformal abuse control naively by just replacing, removing items, and the other one, which is the hours, where we replace items with potentially safe ones that we pick from items the user has previously interacted with. First of all, I guess the most important result is that if we look at the expected reduction of risk at test time, we see that the risk is perfectly controlled, because to a desired reduction in unwanted content specified by the user correspond exactly an empirical reduction in unwanted content at test time. Basically, everything stays on the diagonal, which is the optimal behavior we want to achieve, both for the standard conformal, the naive risk control guarantees and our replace method. But more importantly, if we look at for example, the size of the recommendation set provided to a user, here we were measuring everything in top K, where K is equal to 20. We see that by replacing items, we can maintain, let's say, a larger recommendation set with respect to the remove one, where in order to achieve, for example, 100% reduction in unwanted content, we have to remove all the items from the candidate set, thus providing basically no recommendation to a user. And moreover, also this translates to better performances. For example, here the NSG, we get, let's say, a graceful degradation with respect to the standard remove, the naive remove approach. Yes, any question?
Yeah, so like when you're on the right here of the curves, does it mean that most of the content are like replaced content?
Yes, this is like the next slide is exactly this one here. So here in this slide, we show the amount of previously seen items, the fraction of previously seen item we see in the top K recommendation that we provide to user. And this is plotted against the desired reduction in unwanted content that a user might want to see. And we basically see that for certain models, for example, here for light GCL, which is the blue one, to achieve a 50% reduction in unwanted content at test time, I just have to replace 25% of the items in the .k recommendation. But however, if I have to, if I want 100% reduction in unwanted content in my recommendation, I have to basically provide only previously seen items, so without any serendipity or any diversity potentially in my recommendation, which is kind of like an expected behavior of these systems. I guess this answers your question.
Yes.
Lee? Okay. So we also did some ablation experiments on, for example, the thresholding rule that we use to choose the, let's say, potentially safe items to use within the top K recommendation to replace potentially risky ones. And in general, as you can see here, if we don't really filter, for example, here none, we see that, for example, the size of the recommendation set is higher, because by filtering items, we have less and less alternatives that we can use to replace risky items at test time. But however, I think the most important part here is this plot here, where we show that without this filtering, without this property, because of the let's say the weird behavior we saw in our data analysis, we break basically. If we don't filter out, if we don't filter these repeated items, we're gonna break the risk control guarantees. As you can see here, like this green line doesn't really stay on the diagonal anymore, and basically the empirical reduction at test time does not correspond anymore to the desired reduction that a user might want to have. Again, to go a bit further, we also noticed that users can be divided between high reporting users that report many videos within the platform, and low reporting users that instead interact very seldomly with these affordances. Okay. and usually they are the majority. And here, basically, we plot the expected reduction of risk and the NHG, divided, let's say, segmenting between low reporting users and high reporting users. And we see that, for example, in general, high reporting users bias a lot the risk controlling procedure, the calibration of the threshold lambda. And therefore, like low reporting users are enforced even lower empirical reduction in, let's say, unwantedness of the recommendation with respect to high reporting users. Thus leading, for example, to providing to low reporting user too many repeated items in the recommendation. These were like some results in this video recommendation scenario. But however, here I want to present you a bit of some further results coming from a further contribution we have done that is currently under review, where we tested, let's say, the generalizability of our, let's say, of these risk controlling recommendation systems on a different recommendation scenario. In particular, like last September, this Lambda 500 dataset came out, and its data is coming from Yandex Music. So we are in the scenario of like music recommendation. And in this dataset, we also have this kind of like negative signal, this dislike signal coming from the platform that we can use to, let's say, evaluate kind of this control technique. We did some experiments, let's say, in this scenario, and again, using the same recommenders and the same, let's say, methods as the one from Kuaishou that you showed before. And as you can see here, for example, interestingly, like if you look at the size of the recommendation set, in this scenario, we are able, let's say, to maintain our recommendation set size, a more stable recommendation set size, because I guess in a music scenario, we have much more repeated items we can use to fill out the recommendation, given that anybody like listen multiple times to the same music tracks. And in general, let's say in this offline scenario, also the NHG in this case doesn't really drop too much, since in practice we noticed from subsequent data analysis is that, for example, if a user listens to a song up to its completion, like 100%, then the next time the user will see that song, will most likely listen it again to the completion. So therefore, let's say, maximizing the listening time over the platform, if that's our metric. However, by, let's say, generalizing across these recommendation scenarios, we also show a very, let's say, interesting fact here that you see in this kind of like plot. We basically see that one of the methods, we don't really have, let's say, the risk control guarantees for a certain scoring method, G-former, the orange one. And by doing some further analysis, we show that it happens because we have a distribution shift between the calibration distribution that we use to calibrate, let's say, this threshold, and the test distribution of risk. In short, what happens is that at calibration time, we estimate that the user will experience lower risk that what would happen eventually at test time. Thus, let's say, making this risk not really staying on the diagonal. Therefore, like in this second contribution, we let's say try an alternative way to avoid this kind of like mitigate this distribution shift that would potentially rise in practical deployment of these risk controlling recommendation systems. And the idea is that when we compute the estimator for the lambda threshold, okay, which is like this guy here, we compute it by also adding a reweighting factor, okay, that multiply the expected risk computing over the calibration set, meaning that we can force the risk computed at calibration time to be higher to then account for a potentially higher risk at test time. And if we do this, you can see here, like we did some ablation over different value of this gamma here. And we see that at a certain reweighting factor, for example, here, gamma equal to 3, we basically recover the risk control guarantees in expectation at test time. Thus without, let's say, damaging too much either the size of the recommendation set or the NDGG. So let's say this was all from the let's say experimental and contribution part of this like novel risk control recommendation systems. And however, these guys have, let's say, many, would say, limitations, or we can say opportunities for future work or subsequent analysis and experiments. And this opportunity rises for certain assumptions that we made during the while studying developing the first version of these systems. First of all, for example, our replacement strategy that we use to replace risky items is very simplistic. And the idea is that we might end up having, let's say, a lack of diversity and content polarization, since to achieve, for example, 100% reduction in risk control, we have to provide only repeated content. And in general, we will also need to, let's say, exploit more sophisticated recommendation systems so that consider repeated consumption as a behavior, that model repeated consumption as a behavior. In general, our approach would need, let's say, online validation or user studies to test how user would behave when presented with this new functionality that in practice, let's say, had some provable and theoretical guarantees. And also, let's say, would makes us understand what would be the perceived harmfulness or unwantedness of the recommendations, because maybe users will be satisfied with a not very high alpha at test time, like not 100%, but maybe 25%. Okay, making this approach somehow applicable in practice. And then let's say there are some like limitation that comes from the methodology itself. For example, that we the lambda that we calibrate for the filtering step is actually a global threshold that is computed over all the population of users. And in practice, we would like to have maybe per user thresholds that are personalized on each user history. To avoid potential, let's say, adversarial behavior of users or, let's say, low reporting users being affected too much with respect to high reporting users. And in general, let's say, another more, let's say, mathematical limitation is that these guarantees kind of works only in expectation. And in practice, there are ways to achieve, for example, probabilistic guarantees on the risk. But in general, they require more advanced or involved machinery. So this was all from my side. So if I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, just like let me know.
Yeah, thank you very much. So if anyone has questions, feel free to ask. Maybe I'll start with questions. So yeah, I think it was very interesting to, especially like I found it interesting to analyze. I have never paid much attention to. I didn't even know there were data about reporting signals, so that was interesting. Have you analyzed whether it was like there were some agreements between reports, like if there were many people saying that specific videos were problematic or something like that, or is it like a bit scattered?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. We didn't really like analyze it too much, given that, especially like in Quai Rand, since it's a platform where many items are, let's say, the influx of new items is greater than is very high. So users ends up seeing very different videos at this time. So they end up like reporting different videos, potentially like different videos. In another paper we did some finer grade analysis. I mean coarse grain analysis, where we segment show videos by group because they are tagged by the platform. And so we saw that, let's say, There are some group of videos that are reported basically equally. There are some groups of videos that are reported more than the average, but in general, like the reporting rate is very, very low. It's like in expectation, the reporting rate, like the empirical risk of recommendation, is like 0.002. So overall, the recommendation of the user sees. So it's
you have information about the channels of the creators and how it works? I'm quite sure.
There are some data about the creators, but some of them are kind of like anonymized, and some of the data, for example, the likes that a video obtain, are provided in an aggregate format. So they are like not. They give you like an average over the past like 2-3 weeks period. So it's not very useful, I believe, like for.
Okay.
I mean, we didn't really focus too much on those.
Yeah, because one concern that I have about using the report signals is that I know that there are always a lot of organized campaigns of reporting some videos. In fact, I have been targeted. One of my videos I made was with the Ministry of Health in France, and it was not liked, and it was like there was clearly some coordinated attack on this.
Yeah. Okay, that's unfortunate, let's say, to hear. But actually, funnily about that, we have actually a paper under review at the moment.
Yeah.
Basically, tackles do some experiments on, let's say, exactly that. So saying, imagine that we deploy the system in some platform. How can we show that these systems? I mean, are user able to use these, let's say, these affordance that now work to, let's say, maybe suppress certain items or certain creators? Okay, and so we have some, let's say, theoretical and empirical results showing that, for example, for this kind of risk control recommendation systems, having, let's say, a coordinated attack kind of works for all the videos. So you cannot really target, let's say, one creator or one item and like suppress it. It's more, let's say, on average on the population, which is kind of like nice somehow, but also kind of degrades eventually the performance of the platform for all the users. And so, yeah. And so, I mean, we also provide, let's say, a way to say, oh, we should shift from group level calibration thresholds to individual level thresholds so that everybody has his own filtering threshold. And even if people were to coordinate to use these things to this not interested button to maybe attack you, it wouldn't work because they would only affect their own, let's say, recommendations.
Yeah. Christian, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, if I can jump in again, since you were mentioning the report signal, and one thing that we looked into the literature is, and I think it was mentioned in the slides, is that at the moment the users use different kinds of signals to say, I don't want to see this. And what they think a certain button will do or certain signal will do is maybe different from what the platform has, let's say, designed that button to do. So, for example, we explicitly talk about, especially in the Rexis paper, about this not interested or don't show me this, which is different from report, because in principle, report would be this is like content that may violate the law or really disturbing content that I think should be removed, like violent, like videos showing violence or this sort of things. So they are kind of different signals. But as we have seen also empirically, sometimes people don't use these buttons because they need to do multiple clicks, so it costs effort for them, and so they just skip. And so it's the one problem is, let's say, that the way that most platforms work, it's very easy to give a positive signal. It's very easy to like something, but it's very hard to explain to the platform what is your problem. And with a certain piece of content, and one of the works that we cite say some user prefer to use this not interested to say, I don't want to see this particular content, but I don't want to penalize this creator because I like this creator. And so they try to find a way to communicate this to the platform using the various feedback tool that they have. So they don't use dislike, because they say, if I dislike, I will penalize the creator. But since I like the creator, I use this not interested, because I think that this not interested means I don't want to see this specific thing, but this does not affect the creator. So there is also this confusion from this side, that there are many ways to give these negative signals, but they are also all different. And what we have seen is in past research, some of the work about this kind of negative signals were taking scores, and since there are not so many data set about this, some paper just take, okay, if we have a scoring system, if you have a rating system for videos, we say, if a user gives a rating lower than 2, then we say this is a negative signal, and if it's higher than 2, then it's a positive. But it's kind of arbitrary as well, to interpret the rating in this way.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah. Another question I would have is, so yeah, I've been talking to a few, like for instance, there are also some groups that are trying to defend, advocacy groups that are trying to defend victims of cyberbullying, and they have data. I mean, they have the reports of, because like many people, especially women, know that the button, the report button, is not as effective, especially if it's about signaling. Well, non-consensual nudity is typically one of the worst things. And but they do report this to some other organization. So I don't know if you have tried to reach out to them to collect some data and do some analysis. Or...
No, not really, actually. At the moment, is like this work is mainly like was mainly academic, but now we are trying, let's say, to contact some people. Also, that's why also we contacted you. Let's say also to get this thing, try to understand a bit how this thing move it into the real world somehow, or see where it can be useful, in which scenario it can be useful, how can it be useful. Let's say, for example, I don't know, even if we were like to I don't know, develop and create, deploy this to somewhere, how the user will react to this. Would they see a difference? I mean, besides the empirical and the theoretical guarantees, would they see a difference? Would they perceive a difference in their feed, or is like, I don't know, or maybe they won't say they won't see any differences in what they see, or I don't know.
Yeah, I think it would be. So I know in France there's an organization called Point de Contact, and they collect a lot of. They've been recognized as under the Digital Services Act. You have these signalers, like recognized signalers. I don't know exactly the term, but like they're recognized as an entity that can collect these kind of reports, and then the entity can tell, like I think the European Commission, something like this, that these content should be blocked, and by law they are supposed to block. The platform then has to block the content. But I think there's quite a variety of data that they have. It ranges both from like non-consensual nudity, things that are illegal that should be removed, to cyberbullying, even mass cyberbullying. I mean, they should be removed too, but it's less stringent. Like it could some maybe more borderline, and like I feel like these are interesting data that should be analyzed by someone.
Okay, I don't know if there are like any other questions, or if everything was kind of like crystal clear or terribly boring, one of the two.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about like what kind of collaborations we could consider. Like I feel like we're not exactly doing the same kind of thing. Like we're trying to more like make bad recommendations better, and we're just trying to look at recommending top quality content, which is, I think, two ways to go about this problem, which I think are both important. But I'm not sure what are the more natural intersections.
I guess one thing worth to notice is that we actually care about the risk here, but in practice, this kind of a technique of, in general, like calibration can be applied, or like conformal risk control can be applied to basically any function that you can imagine. So even let's say a function that says, I don't know, I want to measure the quality of the content I have, and I want to make sure that the content that I have the recommendation that I have score at least more than this % of quality, whatever, then you have just to swap, to devise a good metric, and then try to do some experiments. But in practice, we use this for the risk of recommendation, but can be applied to anything. And even the replacement strategy in practice, one thing I was thinking about before this talk was like, okay, what if instead of like repeated content, we maybe provide content trusted by the community, or maybe content that is taken from a certain, let's say general bunch of, let's say, trusted items by the people, by the platform, that they can provide instead of because I suspect that at the end of the day, for the standard user, you will need to replace potentially very, very few items in their recommendations. So you won't need to have, let's say, 50% of the recommendation removed, but maybe only like very, very few, to have these things to be effective somehow. So I guess it's this thing is casted through the lenses of risk, but in general is very adaptive. I mean, the technique itself is very, very easy to use it for many things.
The other thing that we basically wanted to show is that even if you only care about engagement, this technique gives you a way that from the experiments that we did, that I know that you still need to validate in the real world, let's say, but from the experiments that we did, don't affect engagement. So that kind of argument, say, oh, I'm just trying to, I have to maximize the engagement because that's what I care about, and that's the only thing that I do. It's not an argument that stands anymore, because we show the technique that doesn't affect this metric.
That's good. Yeah, there's no more question. I think we can close it here. Thank you very much again for the talk and the work. It was quite good. And I hope we can stay in touch and see what kind of things can be done in the future. Thank you everyone for coming, and hope to see you next time. Next week we have another talk. It's Peter Thornberg will be coming to talk, I think, about effective polarization, I'm guessing, but I don't remember exactly. I was not the organizer. Sorry about that. Thank you for everyone.
Thank you for having us, and see you soon.
Yeah, see you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.